Hello and welcome to the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services 2017 Measures Under Consideration Pre-Rulemaking Open Forum discussion. The primary focus of today's meeting is to provide overviews and demonstrations of the JIRA system for Measures Under Consideration data collection. My name is Martin Alvarado of Patel, and along with Vince Brown, we will be moderating today's webinar. Now, to review some housekeeping items, all participants are muted and will remain muted. At any time during this session, you can type questions using the webinar's text format question and answer feature. You can see this feature in the lower right of your screen. Type your questions. Please make sure to ask your questions only through the Q&A feature and not through the chat option. As time permits, we will read questions out loud for the presenters to answer. Questions that are of general interest but are not answered during the call may be added to the pre-rulemaking frequently asked questions document available on the pre-rulemaking website and after today's webinar. The meeting is being recorded and will be posted on the CMS pre-rulemaking website in an on-demand video format for later viewing. The host will send all participants a link to the recording as soon as it is available. I am pleased to introduce Michelle Jeppe of CMS, who will host the remainder of today's webinar.
Thank you, Martin, and thanks everyone for joining us for today's Measures Under Consideration Open Forum. I am extremely honored to be here sharing information with you about this important topic, pre-rulemaking. Again, my name is Michelle Jeppe, and I am the agency's lead for pre-rulemaking, which is a process that's been around since 2011. Many of you are already familiar with pre-rulemaking, but hopefully we will touch on some topics that maybe will refresh your memory or possibly provide you with some new bits of information. We will definitely mention some important dates for this coming season that you'll want to make note of. All right, so this is an overview of the topics that are going to be covered today. Virtually, I'm joined by a CMS colleague as well as some Patel colleagues. And now we are going to move right into a quick review of the guidelines for proposing a measure and the important dates relevant to publishing the 2017 Measures Under Consideration list. All right, and for the caveats, by program, a measure only has to go on the list once to be considered for rulemaking. If a measure has been on the list before but is now being considered for a different program, it should be added back to the list. And finally, if a measure has a substantive change, it should also be added back to the list. Okay, next slide, please. After measure development and testing concludes, CMS's pre-rulemaking process gets underway with the submission and internal review of measures using JIRA. JIRA is an issue tracking system that's a web-based interface that enables users with the proper credentials to submit measure specifications along with some other pertinent data to CMS beginning each January. For the second year now, CMS has opened JIRA in January to begin the collection process for candidate measure submissions sooner. Earlier Measures Under Consideration seasons didn't start this process until early May, so now developers have an extra 3 months to make their JIRA measure submission. So what happens between January 31st and May 1st that's not depicted here? CMS is planning for the official Measures Under Consideration season kickoff in early May. During this time, I host a series of educational and outreach webinars, with today's meeting being the second in the series of 4. Earlier this week, we kicked off the pre-rulemaking season, and next Tuesday, April the 11th, I'll host CMS's Measurement Needs and Priority session, followed by another session like this one next Thursday, April the 13th. If you'd like to register for any of these events, please send me an email. And as our moderator had said, these events are being recorded for later viewing. To point out, the first 3 boxes on this slide pertain to JIRA system dates. To note, CMS will close JIRA on Friday, June 30th, prohibiting anyone from submitting new candidate measures after this date. Closing JIRA in late June signals the start of the federal clearance process, which relates to the last 3 boxes on this slide. After JIRA closes on June 30th, the measure and program leads begin the tasks are reviewing, accepting, and/or rejecting each and every submitted measure by program. The measures that make the cut essentially are the accepted measures, and these become the annual draft measures under consideration list, also known as the clearance document. The clearance document is created on July 21st. Before the list officially goes into formal clearance on August 21st, it is previewed by all involved federal agency representatives at the August 3rd stakeholder meeting with the purpose of gaining consensus before clearance. For those of you that are not familiar with the federal clearance process as it relates to the measures under consideration list, the list is basically shepherded across CMS, HHS, and OMB components and agencies involving collaboration, cooperation, and communication at varying degrees and levels in a relatively short amount of time to enable publishing of the list by December 1st. And with that, it is my pleasure to turn the presentation over to our next presenter, Jennifer Harris with CMS. She is the measure lead for the merit-based incentive payment system, and she's going to discuss the peer review journal article requirements. So take it away, Jennifer.
Thank you, Michelle. Good morning, everyone. The Medicare Access and CHIP Reauthorization Act requires CMS to submit new measures to an applicable specialty-appropriate peer-reviewed journal before including them in the final annual list of quality measures. The information should include, but is not limited to, the method for developing and selecting the measures, including clinical and other supporting data. Next slide, please. I would like to mention the benefits to this requirement. Submitting measures to a peer-reviewed journal for publication provides transparency, and it is another way to make eligible clinicians aware of the types of quality measures that can be reported. Next slide. In order to collect the necessary information in a standardized way, CMS requires measure owners to complete a peer review template. Included in this slide is a blank template as well as a completed example. Martin, can you pull up the slide, the template on the slide? Thank you. You can also find these documents on the CMS pre-rulemaking website as well. If we scroll down to the bottom, I would like to point out one addition from last year's template. And so basically we're asking submitters to indicate your preferable journal here where CMS can have the opportunity to know what journal you would like to submit us to submit the measures to. That's one change from last year that we have made to the template. Submitters, please attach this template to your measure submission in JIRA for the 2017 MUC list. One form should be completed for each measure. Again, there is an example here, and also these documents can be found on the CMS pre-rulemaking website as well. We can go to the next slide, please. There may be a few changes as we learn how to improve this process going forward, but again, this will be the standardized process for collecting the information for this requirement. Please note that CMS may have additional questions regarding the information provided in the template, so it is helpful if you provide an email and a phone number in JIRA when you submit your measures so we can easily contact you regarding any questions we may have about the peer review information you provided. Now I will turn it back over to Vince.
Thank you, Jennifer. This is Vince Brown from Battelle, and I will be presenting on some new features in JIRA for the measures under consideration and pre-rulemaking web interface. As Michelle noted, it is an online portal run by Office of National Coordinator, and so I'll go through a few slides here very briefly of new features and reminders for those of you who have used JIRA before. We get a number of new people getting access every year, so we like to offer reminders. I will just mention one thing after Jennifer's statement. In the PDF of the slides, if you received those with your reminder yesterday in the email, At the end of that PDF are also copies of the blank MIPS peer review template and the completed example, just for your ready reference. But as Jennifer noted, you can find them also in Word format. The blank is in Word format so that you can edit and save it, one for each measure, on the pre-rulemaking website. If you are creating a new candidate measure for MIPS, at the very bottom of the Create screen in JIRA, you will see a Yes/No button. And once you've uploaded your peer-reviewed journal article form, then if you click that Yes button, that's just kind of a reminder to yourself that needs to be there before the MIPS program leads can review the measure. We do have one new item in JIRA this year. It is asking about the details on the state of development. A required field is that you specify whether your measure is in early development, field testing, or fully developed. But this year there is a new field after that called State of Development Details. And if you're able to provide that information, it will help CMS understand where your measure is in the development cycle. For example, beta testing, alpha testing, and where and when that testing has taken place or is or will take place. There is also an existing field from last year called Evidence of Performance Gap. We added to the screen guidance for this field, and we wanted to find information on the current rate of performance and any variability. It's a kind of a statistical question about the evidence of the performance gap pertaining to your measure. And we would also like, that's a place for you. You can add information about the testing data set that was used. This is a very mechanical point, but I'll mention it because users have asked us before. Some of our fields are multi-select, and you can use your keyboard control button as you click to select multiple items in a drop-down list. That has helped some users before. Can you go to the next slide, please? Just a note, some of the drop-down lists are quite long, lengths of registries and the lengths of possible measure steward organizations. So anytime you see a scroll bar in JIRA, make sure you scroll all the way down if you don't see what you're looking for right on the screen. Just like 2016, if you have a drop-down list that has the other as a choice, if the item or your information is not on the pre-populated drop-down, then you select other. And what we ask you to do in that case is scroll clear to the bottom of the Create screen, and down there you'll see the comments box. And that's where you would type in what the other information is that you referenced up above. It's just a way of providing more complete information about your measure. For example, data source or test setting. If you have a data source that isn't on the drop-down list, you're welcome to add any other data source in the comment box at the bottom. Just a quick reminder, the measure title field is limited to 255 characters. It seems like every year we have some titles that are longer than that and they get truncated, so just try to watch out for that. And then anytime if JIRA has a required field and you do not have that information, unless the screen guidance says otherwise, just put NA in there. As we've noted before, if it's a required field and you leave it blank, JIRA will not let you create that record. It will give you an error until all those required fields marked by an asterisk. And I'll demonstrate this here in a minute. And until all those fields are populated. Next slide, please. You can create and save custom filters. If you have a certain subset of measures for 2017 that you would like to watch or look for, you can obviously search for keywords in JIRA, but you can also set up your own filter and save it. If you're kind of doing the same search over and over again, what you can do is save that filter on any of the criteria, and I'll demonstrate that here in a minute. You're also able to export custom reports into Word file, XML, or CSV. CSV stands for comma separated value, and I use that one most frequently. It can import into Excel after you get it saved out of CSV. That's a nice way if you need to manipulate measures or put them into some other report. It's very handy. And likewise, once you have a filter defined, maybe you have several filters that you're hitting all the time and looking for particular slices or segments of the information, JIRA also lets you create a custom dashboard. And what you do is put the different filters or search criteria into a dashboard, so you could have 2, 3, 5 different searches on your personalized dashboard to save you the time of recreating those and going and finding them all the time. And they do automatically refresh. Next slide. Just a couple quick notes on the self-editing. As Michelle mentioned, on June 30th, that's the last day when users can add a new measure. The question came up on a previous call, what about the self-editing? And so as last year, as it was the case last year, you can in 2017 edit your own measures up until May 1st. That's the cutoff for editing your own measures, a measure that you've previously submitted. You can go back in and change it. Some people find that they submit the measure and then a week later they get new information or something like that. And so then they want to go back in and change it. Well, you can do that until May 1st, and then that stops. But after May 1st until June 30th, you can still add measures. So those are two different cutoff times. Next slide. This just reiterates the closing date for the self-editing feature. And then also, when you're in the edit function, there is a button at the bottom called finished editing, yes or no. If you know for sure that you are finished editing, if you click yes, then that will help your measure move forward in the review and approval process more promptly. So we encourage everyone to use that once you're sure that you're finished editing. Next slide. And this again just reiterates about the self-editing feature. And it applies only to measures that you yourself created and submitted in JIRA. So you cannot go and edit someone else's measure in JIRA. Obviously we want the version that everyone's looking at to be the official one that the submitter as the submitter has entered it. And so you can only edit your own measures. If after May 2nd you need to change your measure, there is a way in JIRA to do that. It's by creating a new issue, and the issue is called Modify Candidate Measure. I'll demonstrate that here in a moment. But what you do is you type in, you identify the measure you're talking about, and then you describe in a box the change that you want to make. And the reason we do this is because the measure has already been moving through the review cycle, and we want to keep all the changes under control so that the CMS programs and other reviewers at CMS are aware of any change that's happening to that measure. So everyone's looking at the current version. So you are able to apply to modify that measure after May 2nd. You just need to do it in a different method. These steps, by the way, are all described in the 2017 user guide for JIRA, which is also available on the CMS pre-rulemaking website. It goes into great detail and has step-by-step screen directions for all these functions that I'm discussing today. Okay, Martin, if I could have the screen sharing feature. While we're switching over, I did see one question, and that was, is the peer-reviewed requirement for all measures? It is only for MIPS, the Merit-Based Incentive Payment System measures. So any of the other 17 or so programs under pre-rulemaking do not need to do the peer-reviewed journal article, only MIPS or MIPS. I'm going to share the screen now, and we'll see how this goes. Okay. This is the screen for the Office of National Coordinator. You do need to get access to use JIRA, and it's in 2 steps. You first apply for a ONC JIRA account, and once you have that account, the user guide describes how to apply for permission from the CMS program. because CMS wants to keep track of who has access to JIRA for this particular Measures Under Consideration 2017 project. So this is just demonstrating what the login screen looks like. If it's your first time in JIRA, you would go up to Projects and search for the 2017 Measures Under Consideration. Depending on your permissions, you may see fewer or more different projects. Here's a summary page that kind of describes this project, and then you'll also see, and these are live, these are actual measures that are in the database today, and once you get JIRA access, you can go look at them and study them all you want. But there's also a handy link here at the bottom of this summary to the pre-rulemaking website that we've been referenced. There's also a link in your slide deck in case that is useful to you. So I want to demonstrate the new features this year by going to start a new measure. You hit this yellow Create button at the top, and a new window will pop up. And you make sure that says Measure Submission in the issue type. That's the default. I had mentioned before the Modify Candidate Measure. So this is where if you need to modify a measure that you've already submitted, you would click that issue type there, and a different form will pop up. But for today, we'll just go to the Measure Submission issue type. And I wanted to show everyone this state of development question. And you can see here's the red asterisk that indicates that the state of development is a required field. So as you're entering your measure, you need to pick one or more of these items. And then here's the question, state of development details. It's a free text box, again, where you're welcome to detail in what state your measure really is. As I noted, here's the question on evidence of performance gap. And you'll notice underneath each text box is a screen guidance in small print. That's describing particular instructions or what is CMS looking for in this question. And this, again, the guidance for the performance gap question was changed from last year. So you might want to refer to that. I'll show an example of using control to select as many as apply. Here's the registry. So if I just click this first one, now on my keyboard I'm holding down the control button and I'm scrolling, so if more than one registry applies to my measure, I can select as many of those as wanted and then go on. This is another good example of the long drop-downs. You can see this, there are many, many different registries from which to choose. So if the registry you want or any other drop-down is not in the list you're seeing, here's the item that's called Other. So if you choose Other, the instruction says enter in comments at far bottom of this screen. This is just like it was last year. We're asking you to go down here in the comments and type registry. And then I'm just typing some things in there. So you can see that would be where you would identify the field you're talking about and then the registry that you wish to be associated with your measure record. I will cancel this out because I don't want to create a measure here. And let's go to View All Issues and Filters. And so this is where you can search for measures. If I wanted to look at measures related to seizure, this was a big year for neurology so far. And so I'm looking for measures that have to do with the word seizure. And I'm seeing there are 12 records in there. So that helps me so I don't have to wade through all 50 or 80 records like that. The other types of searches you can do are, for example, maybe I want the measures, only the measures that are assigned to myself. So I would just click Current User, and we'll see, I have 2 measures assigned to me. So if you happen to be a reviewer at CMS, this is where you would do that in the workflow. Obviously, you can check and uncheck any of these filters. And for example, if you wanted to search for component or CMS program, and let's say I wanted to look at MIPS, for example. So I use this more fields over here, and now I'm going to look alphabetically for the merit-based incentive payment. Now I can see I've got a number of records here. I'm going to select measure submission so it's down to just the actual measures. So we can see now that I've got 50 measures this year out of the 52 that have been submitted were assigned to the merit-based incentive payment system program. And I'm not seeing any other programs in this column here. This View Issues field screen is also where you would export. And just a quick recommendation here from past experience, I think you'll see these options here, and the way that I have found most effective is to get this screen looking just like you want. You're able to select different columns or fields here, and so you get the screen set up with just the columns or variables that you want to see, and then when you hit export, I would use CSV current fields. That way, if you hit CSV all fields, you'll get a bunch of columns that you don't want, I think. That's been my experience anyway. And it requires a little more work, so I would just choose CSV current fields once your screen is set up the way that you want it with the fields that you are most interested in. I won't go into great detail here, but you can go to, well, here's a filter I set up yesterday just as an example. And this was, I saved it over here under favorite filters. So again, once you've set up a search, you can hit the save button, and then you can go back to that the next day or the next week or whenever you need to use it. So this has, the component is MIPS, and the state of development is field test. So now I'm seeing that all of these have the status of field test. And that's just an example of a custom search. The dashboards feature is up here at the top, and so this is the button you would use to set up a dashboard if you find yourself hitting the same searches over and over again and you want to put 2 or 3 of them on your screen at the same time to cross-compare. Again, I mentioned this before, but the deadline or the cutoff for adding new measures is June 30th. The self-editing feature ends May 1st. But between May 1st and June 30th, you can still add new measures. You just cannot edit them yourself. So I did want to clarify that. This concludes the demonstration. I think it might make most sense, Martin. I don't know if we've received any questions from the text box in the right, but it might make more sense if there are questions for Michelle or Jennifer from their presentations. This might be a good time to handle those. And then if there are questions about JIRA or the measures under consideration user interface and database, I'd be happy to continue sharing the screen for those demonstrations. There was a question that came in, and maybe Michelle or Maria Durham, if she's on the line as a presenter, could answer this. There was a question about state of development and what happens if a measure is fully developed but it's still going through field testing. As I noticed, you can choose both of those if you want. You can select field testing and fully developed. It depends circumstance by circumstance which of those is appropriate. I don't know if Michelle or Maria wants to add anything on that based on a question that we had on an earlier call and may be of interest.
Hi, Vince. It's Michelle. I think you answered it perfectly. Yeah, basically that if the measure is fully developed but it's still in testing, the submitter would just want to select both of those because that field is a multi-choice field. So I think that pretty much sums it up.
Okay. I don't know if Martin or if Nicole Brennan is on. Have any other questions come in? This would be the time.
Hi, Vince. No other questions have come in. I'd like to remind everybody that everybody is on mute, and if you have a question, to please use the Q&A box.
Hi, this is Michelle. We'll give it a few minutes while folks take some time to formulate their questions if they have them. So we'll hang out for a few moments and see if we get any questions.
Michelle, would it be appropriate for you to cover the next steps slides while we're waiting to see if any questions pop up?
Absolutely. Yes. So while we're waiting for questions, as I referenced on slide 5, these dates represent the educational and outreach series that I host during the pre-rulemaking season. You can get to the next step slide, Martin. I think it's 17. All right, so again, if anyone would like to be invited to any of these meetings, please send me an email. My email address is found at the end of this slide deck. And then you may also access additional CMS pre-rulemaking resources by clicking on the link there at the bottom of this slide 17. And that's pretty much it for the next step slide. And just a reminder, all of these sessions are being recorded, so if you have colleagues that are unable to join these sessions for any reason, they are being recorded and they will be put up on the CMS pre-rulemaking website for future viewing. It looks like we may have gotten a question. Okay, the question came in from a participant. Just to confirm, we do not need to start a submission for new measures before May 1st. That editing deadline is just for measure submissions that we started prior to May 1st. That is correct. So any measures that you would enter now through May 1st, you can feel free to edit them yourself. And then after May 1st, you would actually need to make a request to edit a submission. So hopefully that answers your question. If not, please feel free to email us or enter another question to clarify.
This is Vince Brown. I will make one other reminder. This is our most frequently asked question from my work anyway, has been, once I start entering a new measure record, can I stop and save it and come back later? And unfortunately, the answer to that question is no. It's a JIRA, the way JIRA is programmed. Once you start typing in your measure or entering your measure information, you need to populate all the fields and go down to the Create button. There are items in the user guide that describe templates that are available to you to help make sure all the information is together and ready when you go in. Because people, I think, sometimes expect to be able to just stop and save and re-enter, but JIRA is not set up, unfortunately, that way. So but I've seen people entering measures. You know, I just watch the login time, and usually they can put them in 4, 6, or 8 minutes once everything is together. It just seems that way when they're really clipping through it and all their data source material is in order. Obviously, other people, depending circumstance by circumstance, it may take longer, but just wanted to make everyone aware of that.
This is Michelle Jeppe again. Also, just to mention some of the resources that are available to support you on the pre-rulemaking website from CMS. There is a Measures Under Consideration user guide available on the website. That's quite extensive. That will walk you through step-by-step how to enter a measure and so forth. There's also a complete timeline of pre-rulemaking activities available for this measures under consideration season, available on the website as well as the 2 documents that Jennifer Harris, my CMS colleague, kindly reviewed with us today. They are available on the CMS website under additional resources. The catch line for those is MIPS peer review template and completed sample. All right, so it doesn't look like we're going to have any additional questions at this point. So I believe we can conclude the call. I just want to thank Martin, Vince, and Jennifer for presenting today. And I want to thank everybody for your time and attention to pre-rulemaking. Thanks for joining.